The main door of the outpost opened with a sound like a tired sigh. Metal scraped against metal as the damaged panels separated, and a shaft of orange light from the Velar 9 sky fell across the floor of the entrance corridor. Yuna stood at the threshold, with Duri behind her, and the 8 members of the security team flanking the corridor walls. Their weapons were still raised, because 3 days of siege did not leave the body just because the mind said it was over. Jisoo kept her plasma rifle aimed at the opening, her young face set in a mask of exhausted readiness. Then the humans walked in. Jinho came first. He was still covered in the green fluid from the hive coordinator, mixed with dirt and his own dried blood. His armor was cracked in 3 places. One arm hung slightly lower than the other, where the Drovni blade had cut his shoulder. He smelled like burning metal and something organic that Yuna's senses could not identify. He stopped 2 steps inside the door and looked at Yuna. His visor was up, and she could see his face. It was not the face of a monster. It was the face of a tired man with dark eyes and a thin scar across his jaw that looked old and familiar to him. He did not smile. He did not salute. He just looked at her and nodded once, the way a person nods when they have finished a long and difficult job. "Sergeant Jinho, Earth Defense Forces, Charlie Squad," he said. "Your outpost is secure." Behind him the rest of his squad filed in. Unji, who was limping, but still carrying her heavy repeater like it weighed nothing. Siwon, whose precise eyes scanned the corridor out of habit, even though the fighting was done. Boyoung, who immediately spotted Minji's bandaged arm across the room, and walked toward her without being asked, already pulling supplies from her medical kit. Yuna opened her mouth to speak, but found that she had no words. 3 days of terror, 3 days of watching the swarm close in, 3 days of accepting that she and everyone in this outpost were going to die. And now, a human soldier stood in front of her, bleeding and calm, telling her it was over. "Thank you," she finally managed. It felt absurdly small. Jinho just nodded again and stepped aside, as more humans entered the outpost, carrying supplies and medical equipment. They moved through the corridors with a careful efficiency, checking on the station's personnel, patching wounds, distributing food and water. Boyoung had already set up a small medical station in the common area, and was treating Minji's arm while talking to her in a low, gentle voice that seemed impossible coming from someone who had been killing aliens with her bare hands an hour ago. Yuna watched all of this with a feeling she could not name. It was not just gratitude. It was something deeper, something that shifted the ground beneath everything she thought she knew. An hour later, Captain Taeho came down from the Iron Wake. He walked into the command room without ceremony. He was not wearing armor. He had changed into a simple dark uniform, and without the weight of combat gear, he looked smaller than Yuna had imagined. Ordinary, almost. Just a man of average height, with steady hands, and eyes that looked like they had seen too much, and decided to keep going anyway. "Commander Yuna," he said, "I am Captain Taeho. I apologize for the delay. You arrived 8 hours ahead of your original estimate. Your engineer nearly blew up your ship getting here. You lost a frigate engine in the orbital battle. Your soldiers fought through a Dravni horde on foot, and you are apologizing for the delay." Taeho tilted his head slightly. "We could have been faster." Yuna let out a breath that was almost a laugh. She sat down on the edge of the console because her legs did not want to hold her up anymore. "Captain, I need to ask you something." "Go ahead. Why did you come?" He looked at her with an expression that she would think about for years afterward. It was not pride. It was not duty. It was something simpler and older than both of those things. "You called," he said. "That is enough." "But the Federation did not send you. We are not your allies. Your people have been kept at a distance by our government for 30 years. You had no obligation to answer." He looked around the command room, at the flickering lights, the cracked walls, the exhausted faces of people who had been waiting to die. Then he looked back at Yuna. "On my world," he said, "there is an old idea. It does not matter if the person calling for help is your friend or your stranger. If you hear the call and you can reach them, you go. You do not ask if they deserve it. You do not check if it is politically convenient. You just go." He paused. "Maybe that makes us simple. Maybe the Federation is right to keep us at arm's length, because we do not think about these things the way we are supposed to. But 42 people were going to die on this rock, and my crew and I decided that was not going to happen today." Yuna felt something hot behind her eyes. She blinked it away and straightened her back. "Your people are remarkable, Captain." "My people are stubborn," Tejo said. "There is a difference." Over the next several hours, the human ships secured the orbit around Velar 9 and set up a defensive perimeter. The surviving Dravni ground forces, scattered and confused without their hive coordinator, were rounded up or driven back to their landing ships, which the humans allowed to leave the planet. Tejo could have destroyed them. His weapons officer, Hana, had argued loudly and colorfully that they should. But Tejo overruled her. "Let them go," he said. "Let them carry the memory of what happened here back to the rest of the swarm. Fear is a more efficient weapon than a missile." The Federation fleet arrived 4 days later. Admiral Quan, a senior officer with decades of experience and a reputation for careful diplomacy, stepped off his flagship and found the situation already resolved. The outpost was intact, the personnel were alive, and 13 human ships sat in orbit, scarred and battered, but very much functional. Quan met with Yuna in the command room. She gave him a full report. She told him everything, from the first moment the Dravni appeared to the moment Jingho walked through the door covered in green fluid. She did not leave out any details. She did not soften anything. When she was finished, Quan was silent for a long time. Then he said, "This will change things." "Yes," Yuna said, "it will." And it did. The report from Velar 9 spread through the Federation like fire through dry grass. Every species, every world, every council member read the account of what had happened. They read about the Iron Wake pushing its engines past the breaking point. They read about Jingho charging into the hive coordinator with 4 soldiers against 6 elite guards. They read about Hana grinning in her weapons chair as she tore through Dravni warships. They read about Unji running across ground hot enough to melt her boots, and not stopping. And they read the words that Captain Tejo said when asked why he came. "You called. That is enough." The galaxy had spent 30 years keeping humans at a distance because they were frightened of what they were. Deathworlders, predators, creatures from a planet so hostile that it made monsters of everything it touched. But now, the galaxy understood something new. Yes, the humans were terrifying. Yes, they came from a world of fire and violence and death. Yes, they fought with a ferocity that made ancient predator species turn and run. But they did not fight for themselves. They fought for the voice on the other end of the signal. They fought for the stranger they had never met. They fought for the 42 people sitting in a tin box on a rock in the middle of nowhere, because those people had asked for help and the humans had heard them. The Federation quietly began revising its policies toward Earth. Diplomatic channels opened wider. Trade restrictions were loosened, and for the first time, humans were invited to sit in the inner council chamber. Nobody ever sent an SOS lightly again, because now everyone knew what might answer. And deep in the black between the stars, the Iron Wake sailed on, its hull still scarred, its crew still laughing, ready for the next call. Because there was always a next call. Sergeant Jinho was the first human to make contact with the Dravni on the ground, and the Dravni were not ready for him. He hit their front line like a boulder rolling downhill. His armor was dented from the drop. His visor was cracked on the left side. and one of his boots had a piece of shrapnel jammed into the sole. He did not notice any of it. He raised his rifle and fired 3 bursts into the first Dravni warrior he saw, each shot punching through the creature's armored chestplate and dropping it to the stone in a tangle of broken limbs. Behind him, his squad spread out in a practiced formation, moving with the kind of coordination that only came from years of training and the peculiar human ability to understand each other without speaking. Private Yunji took the left flank, her heavy repeater cutting wide arcs through the swarm. Corporal Siwan moved right, using the rocky terrain for cover while picking off the larger Dravni warriors with precise single shots. Medic Bo-young stayed in the center, her rifle in one hand and her medical kit bouncing against her hip as she ran. The Dravni did not understand what was happening. Their hive mind processed the situation in milliseconds, analyzing the threat, comparing it to every species they had ever consumed. The data did not match anything in their collective memory. These creatures were smaller than them. They had no natural armor, no venom, no biological weapons. Their skin was soft, their bones fragile by galactic standards. They should have been easy prey, but they were not dying the way they were supposed to. Jinho took a hit from a Dravni blade arm that would have cut a Federation soldier in half. It sliced through his shoulder plate and opened a gash in the flesh beneath. Blood sprayed across his cracked visor in a hot red line. Jinho looked down at the wound, looked back up at the Dravni that had cut him, and headbutted it so hard that its facial plates shattered. Then he kept fighting. The Dravni hive mind sent a signal of confusion through its ranks. The chemical message rippled through thousands of warriors at once. The word, translated roughly from their pheromone language, was something close to wrong. Something was wrong. The prey was not behaving like prey. From the Iron Wake, more squads poured out in waves. Each team had a specific objective, and they moved toward those objectives with a focus that bordered on obsession. Alpha Squad pushed toward the Easter Ridge to cut off the Dravni supply line. Bravo Squad circled south to flank the main horde. Charlie Squad, led by Jinho, drove straight into the center of the swarm like a spear aimed at the heart. Captain Teho coordinated from the ship's command center, watching the battle through dozens of helmet cameras and drone feeds. His voice came through the squad channels, steady and calm, giving orders with the precision of a man playing a game he had played 1,000 times before. Alpha, you have 30 hostiles on your 9 o'clock. Adjust formation and sweep. Bravo, hold position at the south ridge. Wait for my mark. Charlie, Jinho, the hive coordinator is 200 meters ahead of your position, behind the rock formation. Take it out, and the ground forces lose cohesion. Jinho grinned through the blood on his face. Copy that, Captain. He signaled to his squad, and they pushed forward. The ground beneath them was hot. Velar 9 had geothermal vents scattered across its surface, and the area near the Dravni landing zone was particularly active. Steam hissed from cracks in the rock, and in some places the stone itself glowed a faint orange from the heat below. Yunji's boots started smoking. She looked down, shrugged, and kept running. The Dravni warriors fought back with everything they had. They were not cowards. They had earned their reputation as the most feared predators in 6 systems. Their blade arms could cut through starship-grade metal. Their acid spit could dissolve ceramic armor in seconds. Their coordination was flawless, each warrior moving as an extension of the hive mind. But the humans adapted. That was the thing about Deathworlders that the Federation files never properly explained. It was not just that humans were strong, or tough, or aggressive. It was that they learned in the middle of a fight. The first time a Dravni used its acid spit against a human squad, 3 soldiers got burned. The second time it happened, the humans had already adjusted their spacing and angle of approach. The third time, Siwan shot the acid gland out of the Dravni's head, before it could even open its mouth. The swarm had never fought an enemy that got better while the battle was still happening. Jinho's squad reached the rock formation where the hive coordinator sat. The coordinator was different from the warriors. It was larger, softer, its body bloated with the chemical glands that produced the signals controlling the entire ground force. It was surrounded by a ring of elite guards, each one nearly 4 meters tall, their armor thicker and darker than the standard warriors. Jinho stopped behind a boulder and assessed the situation. 6 guards, 1 coordinator. His squad had 4 people, 2 of whom were wounded. The smart play was to call for reinforcements and wait. Jinho did not make the smart play. Boyoung, patch my shoulder. Unji, give me suppressive fire on the left 3. Siwon, you take the right. On my signal, we go. Boyoung pressed a med patch against his wound. The painkillers hit his bloodstream and his vision sharpened. He rolled his shoulder once, winced, and then nodded. Go. Unji opened fire. Her heavy repeater screamed as it sent a wall of plasma toward the left side of the guard ring. The 3 guards on that side turned to face the threat, their blade arms raised, their bodies moving to form a defensive wall. At the same moment, Siwon fired from the right, 3 precise shots that hit the joints of the guards on that side where the armor was thinnest. 2 guards dropped, and through the gap, Jinho charged. He covered the distance in seconds, his legs driving him forward over the hot stone with a speed that surprised even the Dravni. The remaining guards tried to close the gap, but they were too slow. Jinho reached the coordinator and jammed his rifle against the soft membrane of its chemical gland. He fired. The coordinator exploded in a burst of thick, greenish fluid that coated Jinho from head to toe. The chemical cloud spread outward, and every Dravni warrior within a kilometer suddenly stopped moving. The hive signal was gone. The thing that connected them, that told them where to go and what to attack and how to fight, was dead. For the first time in their existence, the Dravni warriors were alone. They panicked. The organized army that had been advancing on the outpost with mechanical precision dissolved into chaos. Warriors ran in random directions, crashing into each other, their limbs flailing without purpose. Some of them attacked their own kind. Others simply froze, standing motionless on the battlefield, as their individual minds, so long dependent on the hive, failed to process a reality where they had to think for themselves. The human squads did not stop. They moved through the chaos with grim efficiency, clearing sector after sector, pushing the scattered Dravni forces back toward their landing ships. The battle was no longer a fight. It was a cleanup. In orbit, the story was the same. The 12 frigates had destroyed or disabled most of the Dravni fleet. The surviving ships, cut off from the hive mind's coordination, broke away and fled into hyperspace, leaving their ground forces behind. Jinho stood in the middle of the battlefield, covered in green Dravni fluid and his own blood, breathing hard. Around him, the last of the Dravni warriors were being neutralized. The ground was littered with broken exoskeletons and shattered blade arms. Unji walked up beside him and looked at the carnage. "Well," she said, "that was something." Jinho wiped the fluid from his cracked visor and looked toward the outpost in the distance. The walls were dented and scorched, but still standing. The lights inside were still flickering, but they were on. "Come on," he said. "Let us go say hello." The shield failed at the 9th hour. Yuna heard it die. There was no explosion, no dramatic crash, just a low hum that had been running in the background for days, so constant that she had stopped noticing it, and then silence. The kind of silence that made every person in the command room stop breathing. "Shield is down," Dury said. His voice was flat. He had gone past fear into a place beyond it. A cold, numb space where the body kept working, even though the mind had already accepted what was coming. Yuna looked at the screen. The Dravni ground forces had moved faster than predicted. They were less than a kilometer away now. A dark wave of clicking, chittering bodies flowing over the rocks like spilled ink. The sound of them traveled through the ground itself, a vibration that Yuna could feel in the soles of her boots. She had ordered everyone into the inner sections of the outpost. The 8 security officers stood at the main corridor, their weapons charged, their faces tight. Jisoo, the youngest of them, stood at the front with a plasma rifle that was almost as big as she was. Her hands were steady. Yuna was proud of her for that. "Everyone knows the plan," Yuna said to the room. "We hold the corridor as long as we can. We buy time." No one asked what they were buying time for. There was nothing coming. The Federation fleet was still days away. The human ships were still hours away. The math did not work. Everyone in the room knew that. But they stood anyway, because standing was the only thing left to do. The first impact hit the outer wall like a hammer made of thunder. The entire outpost shook, and dust fell from the ceiling in thin white streams. Then another impact. And another. They were using their bodies, throwing themselves against the walls with the full force of their armored exoskeletons, cracking the metal one blow at a time. Yuna counted the seconds between each impact. They were getting closer together. "Duri," she said, "send one more signal. Tell anyone who can hear us that this is our final transmission." Duri nodded and turned to his console. His fingers moved across the keys, and the signal went out one last time. A small voice in a very large darkness. And then, something happened that Yuna did not expect. The sky broke open. There was no other way to describe it. One moment, the orange sky of Velar 9 was empty except for clouds and the dark shapes of Dravni ships in high orbit. The next moment, a crack of white light split the sky from one end to the other, and through it came 13 ships, moving at a speed that should have been impossible. It tore through the hyperspace exit like a fist punching through a wall, its engines burning so bright that they left glowing trails in the atmosphere. Behind it came the 12 frigates, spreading out in a formation that looked like the opening wings of a bird of prey. Yuna stared at the screen with her mouth open. The sensors were going wild, throwing numbers and warnings across every display. The human ships were not slowing down. They were accelerating, straight toward the Dravni fleet. "That is insane," Duri whispered. "They are going to ram them." But they did not ram them. Something worse happened. The iron wake opened its hull plates, and from beneath the dark metal, rows of weapons appeared that the Federation had no names for. They fired in a single synchronized burst, and the space between the human ship and the Dravni fleet turned white. 3 Dravni ships simply stopped existing. One moment they were there, jagged and threatening, and the next they were expanding clouds of debris and fire. The frigates hit the flanks. They moved in pairs, weaving between the larger Dravni vessels with a speed and precision that made Yuna's head spin. The Dravni tried to respond. They fired their organic weapons, launching streams of acid and hardened projectiles at the human ships. Some of them hit. The armor on the frigates cracked and burned. The frigates did not stop. They did not even slow down. They kept firing, kept moving, kept pushing deeper into the swarm. One of them lost an engine and started trailing smoke. Its captain turned the damaged ship directly toward the nearest Dravni carrier and increased speed. At the last moment, the crew fired every weapon they had and then pulled away, leaving the carrier burning behind them. Yuna watched all of this from the command room, her hands gripping the console so hard that her knuckles turned white. She had studied space combat in the academy. She had watched recordings of fleet engagements between Federation forces and various threats. Those battles were organized, methodical, careful. Ships maintained distance. Commanders followed established tactics. Losses were minimized. This was not that. This was violence. Raw, furious, relentless violence. The humans fought the way a storm fights a coastline, with no hesitation, no restraint, and absolutely no mercy. Within 20 minutes, 8 Dravni ships were destroyed. The rest of the swarm fleet began to scatter, breaking formation for the first time anyone in the Federation had ever recorded. The Dravni did not scatter. That was one of the things that made them so terrifying. They moved as one, attacked as one, died as one. But they were scattering now, because something had arrived that they had never encountered before. Something that did not run, did not hesitate, and did not stop when it was wounded. While the frigates tore through the orbital fleet, the Iron Wake descended toward the planet's surface. It came down through the atmosphere like a falling star, its hull glowing red from the heat of re-entry. It landed half a kilometer from the outpost, with an impact that shook the ground hard enough to crack the stone beneath it. The Dravni ground forces stopped their assault on the outpost walls. Thousands of insectoid heads turned toward the massive dark ship that had just fallen from the sky. For a long moment, nothing moved. The Dravni studied this new thing with the cold calculation of a hive mind assessing a threat. Then the main doors of the Iron Wake opened. Yuta switched to the external cameras and felt her blood go cold. Humans came out of that ship like water bursting from a dam. They were wearing heavy armor, carrying weapons that looked oversized even for their large frames, and they were running directly toward the Dravni horde. At the front of the charge was a man who was screaming something that Yuna's translator could not process, because it was not words. It was just a sound, a raw, primal roar that came from somewhere deep inside the human chest, from a place that had been forged by 1,000,000 years of surviving on a world that wanted everything dead. The Dravni charged to meet them, and for the first time in the recorded history of the galaxy, the Dravni swarm met something that charged back harder. Inside the command room, Yuna sank into her chair and watched the battle unfold on the screens. Her hands were shaking, her eyes were wide. Behind her, Duri made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. "Commander," he said, "I think we are going to live." She just watched the humans fight, and she understood, for the first time, why the Federation was afraid of them. Not because they were cruel, not because they were evil, because they were relentless, and they had come for the people behind these walls. The Iron Wake was not a beautiful ship. It was not elegant or graceful or designed to impress anyone. It was a block of dark metal, thick and heavy, built the way humans built everything, to survive. Its hull was layered with 3 types of armor. Its engines burned fuel that most species considered too unstable to store. Its weapon systems were not mounted on the outside, like on Federation ships. They sat behind retractable plates, hidden, like the teeth of a predator that kept its mouth closed until it was time to bite. Captain Tejo stood on the bridge with his arms crossed, watching the navigation display as the stars stretched into long white lines around them. They were moving fast, faster than the ship was designed to go, and the hull groaned with the strain. He did not care. Someone had called for help, and that was the only thing that mattered. He was not a tall man, but there was something about the way he stood that made people pay attention. His face was calm, almost bored, but his eyes never stopped moving. He had been a soldier for 20 years, had fought in 3 border conflicts, and had buried more friends than he liked to count. The scars on his hands and neck were not decorations. They were receipts. "Captain," said Lieutenant Hana from the weapons station. She was leaning back in her chair, with one boot resting on the edge of her console. Her dark hair was tied back in a short knot, and she was chewing on something that might have been dried meat or might have been a piece of rubber. With Hana, it was hard to tell. "I pulled up the Federation file on these Dravni things." "And?" Taiho said without turning around. "Big, mean, lots of legs, armor plating on the exoskeleton that can stop standard plasma rounds. They communicate through chemical signals, so they coordinate without any radio chatter. Basically, a giant hive mind. She paused and cracked her knuckles one by one, a habit that made the non-human crew members flinch every time. They have conquered 6 systems in the last 10 years. No species has ever successfully fought them off. Tejo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No species has ever been us." Hana grinned. It was not a friendly grin. It was the kind of grin that a wolf gives before it starts running. That is exactly what I was thinking. Behind them, the rest of the bridge crew worked in steady silence. Ensign Do-hyun, the youngest member of the team, monitored the fleet's formation on his screen. 12 assault frigates flew in perfect formation around the Iron Wake, each one carrying a crew of 60 and enough firepower to crack a small moon. Communications Officer Soman tracked the distress signal from Velar 9, keeping the channel open in case there were updates. What do we know about the outpost? Soman pulled up the data. Federation Research Station. 42 personnel, mostly scientists. Small security team with light weapons. Their shield was at 31% as of the last transmission. The Drovni have ground forces approaching from the east, estimated to reach the outpost in about 6 hours from the time of the signal. Tejo looked at the navigation display. And our arrival time? 14 hours at current speed, Salmon said. If we push the engines past safety limits, we could cut it to 12, maybe 11. That is still 5 hours too late, Tejo said. The bridge went quiet. Everyone knew what that meant. By the time they arrived, the Drovni would have already reached the outpost. The people inside would be dead, or worse. Tejo stared at the display for a long time. Then he pressed the intercom button on his chair. "Engine room, this is the captain," a rough voice answered. "Engine room. Chief Gunwoo here." "Gunwoo, I need more speed." There was a pause. "Captain, we are already running 10% above maximum. If I push it further, there is a real chance the core destabilizes." "I did not ask about chances," Tejo said. "I asked for more speed." Another pause, longer this time. Then Gunwoo laughed. It was a short, dry laugh, the kind that came from a man who had stopped being surprised by impossible orders a long time ago. "Understood, Captain. I will see what I can do. But if we blow up, I want it on the record that I told you so." "Noted," Tejo said, and cut the channel. Hana looked at him sideways. "You know he is going to bypass every safety protocol on the ship." "Yes. And if the core blows, we all die in a very bright flash." "Also yes." Hana shrugged and went back to chewing whatever was in her mouth. "Just making sure we are all on the same page." Tejo turned to face the bridge crew. Every one of them was looking at him. He could see it in their eyes. Not fear, not hesitation, just a quiet, steady readiness that he had learned to recognize over the years. These were humans. They were born on a world that tried to kill them every day. They ate danger for breakfast. And when someone sent out a cry for help, something deep inside them, something old and fierce and unbreakable, woke up and said, "Go." "Listen carefully," Tejo said. The people on that outpost sent a signal for help. They were hoping their allies would hear it. Instead, they got us. He paused. "Some of you have read the Federation files. You know what they think of us. They think we are monsters, Deathworlders. They keep us at a distance because we scare them." He looked around the bridge slowly. "They are right to be scared. But not because we are their enemy. Because we are about to show the Dravni swarm what happens when you threaten people under our protection." The ship hummed beneath their feet as Gunwoo coaxed more power from the engines. The stars outside the viewport blurred into streaks of white and blue. "Hana," Tejo said, "prepare all weapon systems. Full combat loadout. I want every turret charged, every missile armed, and every boarding team suited up before we drop out of hyperspace." Hana was already moving. With pleasure, Captain. Dohun, coordinate with the frigate captains. I want attack formation Delta when we arrive. The frigates hit the fleet in orbit. The Iron Wake goes straight for the planet. Yes, sir, Dohun said, his fingers flying over the console. Soman, send a message back to the outpost. Tell them to hold on. Tell them help is coming faster than they think. Soman nodded and began composing the transmission. Teho sat back in his command chair and looked at the stars racing past. Somewhere out there, 42 people were sitting in a tin box, waiting to die, surrounded by monsters that the galaxy had decided were unstoppable. The galaxy was about to learn something new. There was always a bigger monster. The lights on Valar 9 had not stopped flickering for 3 days. Every time they blinked, Yuna felt her stomach drop. She stood at the center of the command room, her fingers pressed hard against the edge of the console, and stared at the screens that showed nothing but bad news. The outpost was not built for war. It was a research station, a place where scientists studied the strange crystals that grew beneath the surface of the planet. 42 people lived here. Researchers, engineers, medical staff, and a small security team of 8. They had light weapons, basic shields, and enough food for 2 more weeks. That was all. But the Dravni swarm did not care about any of that. They had arrived without warning. One moment, the sky was empty, and the next it was filled with hundreds of dark, jagged ships that looked like broken bones floating in space. The Dravni were insectoid creatures, each one standing nearly 3 meters tall, with razor-sharp limbs and armored skin that could stop a plasma round. They did not negotiate. They did not send messages. They simply consumed. Every planet they touched became a dead rock within weeks. Yuna had read about them in the Federation archives. She had seen the images of destroyed colonies, the empty cities, the bones left behind. She never imagined she would see them with her own eyes. "Commander," said Duri, her communications officer. He was young, barely old enough to hold his rank, and his hands were shaking over the console. "The shield is at 31%. If they hit us again, it will not hold." Yuna did not answer right away. She looked at the screen that showed the surface outside the outpost. The Dravni had landed their ground forces 2 kilometers to the east. Thousands of them moved across the rocky terrain like a living carpet, their legs clicking against the stone in a sound that could be heard even through the walls. "How long until they reach us?" she asked. "At their current speed, 6 hours, Duri said. "Maybe less." 6 hours. Yuna closed her eyes. She had sent a distress signal the moment the Dravni appeared in orbit. That was 3 days ago. 3 days, and no one had come. The nearest Federation fleet was stationed at Korath Prime, 11 light-years away. Even at maximum speed, they would need 5 more days to arrive. They did not have 5 days. "Send the signal again," Yuna said. "On all frequencies, every channel, open, encrypted, military, civilian, everything." Duri looked at her. "Commander, if we broadcast on open channels, anyone could hear it, not just the Federation." "I know," Yuna said. "Do it, anyway." Duri hesitated for a moment, then turned back to his console and began typing. The signal went out like a scream into the void, a pulse of data that carried their location, their situation, and a single word repeated over and over: "Help." Yuna walked away from the console and moved to the observation window. The sky above Velar 9 was a deep orange, filled with clouds of dust that the planet's thin winds pushed from one horizon to the other. Somewhere above those clouds, the Dravni fleet sat in orbit, waiting. They were in no hurry. They never were. They knew that no one on this planet could stop them. She thought about the 42 people behind her. Minji, the lead geologist, who had spent 3 years mapping the crystal formations underground. Old Bora, the station's cook, who made terrible soup, but always smiled. Jisoo, the youngest member of the security team, who had just turned 20 and still called her mother every week on the long-range communicator. They were all going to die here. Yuna pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window and tried to breathe. She had trained for emergencies. She had run simulations, studied tactics, memorized protocols, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this, the slow, grinding certainty that help was not coming. "Commander," Duri's voice again. This time it sounded different. There was something in it that Yuna could not identify. Not fear, something else. She turned around. "What is it?" "We received a response to the distress signal." Yuna's heart jumped. "From Korath Prime?" "No." Duri swallowed hard. He looked at his screen, as if the words on it did not make sense. "The signal origin is from Sol's system." The room went very quiet. Yuna stared at Duri. Sol's system. She knew that name. Every officer in the Federation knew that name, even though most of them had never been there and never wanted to go. Sol 3, Earth, the Death World. It was a planet that the Federation had classified as a Category 12 hazard zone, the highest rating possible. A world of crushing gravity, extreme weather, constant seismic activity, and an ecosystem so violent that nearly every living thing on the planet had evolved to kill or be killed. And somehow, impossibly, an intelligent species had risen from that nightmare. Humans. The Federation had made contact with them 30 years ago, and had immediately regretted it. The humans were not hostile, not exactly, but they were deeply unsettling. They ate the flesh of other creatures. They could function without sleep for days. They healed from injuries that would kill most species. They bonded emotionally with anything, including dangerous predators. And they had a concept called war that they had practiced on each other for thousands of years before they even reached space. The Federation had agreed, quietly and unanimously, to keep Earth at arm's length. Trade was limited. Diplomatic contact was minimal. The humans were given a seat on the Outer Council, but were never invited to the inner chambers. Everyone smiled at them and made sure to never ever make them angry. And now they had heard the SOS. "What does the message say?" Yuna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Duri read from his screen. Message reads, "This is Captain Tejo of the Earth Defense Vessel Iron Wake. We have received your distress signal. Hold your position. We are coming. Estimated arrival, 14 hours. 14 hours. The Dravni ground forces would reach the outpost in 6. Yuna did the math in her head, and felt the hope that had sparked in her chest begin to fade. "Commander, there is more. The transmission includes a fleet signature." "How many ships?" Duri looked up from his screen. His face was pale. 13. Yuna stared at him. 13 ships, against a Dravni swarm that numbered in the hundreds. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to cry. She wanted to ask the universe what kind of cruel joke this was. But deep in the back of her mind, in the place where she kept the things she had read in classified files and half-whispered rumors, a small voice said something that made the hair on her arms stand up. 13 ships might be enough, because they were human ships, and the humans did not come to lose.